Ukrainian forces and fighters. It's more determined than surely the Kremlin could have imagined.
Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself.
Russian armed forces keep attacking maternity wards, kindergartens, orphanages, hospitals.
And the views that need to be heard.
Ukraine's leader decried Russia's escalation of attacks on crowded cities as a blatant terror campaign.
John Pienaar at Drive. This afternoon from 4 till 7 on Times Radio.
Hello, Grace.
Hello, Grace. I've got Braxton Drysdale III from Chicago for you.
Sanjeet not free?
Client meeting till 3.
Have you tried Martin?
Martin's at the dentist. Rob's presenting. I'm putting this ad on hold to say I don't work here. I'm a Moneypenny receptionist. We know all our clients' availability via platforms such as Microsoft Teams, so we always know where everyone is. We transfer calls virtually, professionally, brilliantly to mobile, office, laptop, or wherever works. Shall I put him through, Grace?
Please.
Make hybrid working work with Moneypenny.
Times Radio Breakfast with Aasmah and Stig Abell.
Morning to you. It is 14 minutes past 9. Let's introduce our panel this morning. We have Ayesha Hazarika, Times Radio presenter. Good morning to you, Ayesha.
Good morning.
And Ruth Davidson, former Scottish Conservative leader and now Times Radio presenter too. Why have one when you can have two? Good morning to you, Ruth.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Not too bad. Slightly bemused and befuddled by this whole Poland jets story. So for people who don't know, the United States has rejected Poland's surprise announcement that it would hand over its fleet of MiG-29 fighter jets to President Zelensky's government. So, Ruth, my understanding is that it was a cunning plan.
Can you take me through it? Because I went to bed and these jets were going to Ukraine, and I woke up this morning and they weren't. And I was like, I don't know what's happened in between.
Well, I can't tell you why it's happened, apart from the fact that the Department of Defense and the American government said it was not tenable, which I'm not sure why they didn't know that before you went to bed, because perhaps many of us could have said this. What it seems to be is that...
I think the thing here is what constitutes an act of war? What constitutes an aggressive act and therefore allows Russia, under the kind of international rules, to invade Poland or a NATO member or etc. Because NATO and NATO members are trying to play a really careful job and a really careful role here of supporting Ukraine, because Ukraine is not a member of the alliance, doing it in a way which doesn't cross any international boundaries and is not seen as an act of aggression or an act of war, which is why you're seeing supply lines, which is why you're seeing humanitarian aid, which is why you're seeing financial aid, communication support, all that sort of stuff. Handing 27 fighter jets over to shoot down Russian planes is definitely picking up the pace and tempo of what constitutes an aggressive act, which is presumably why Poland thought that they would do it via the US, because Russia's not about to attack the US. However, you would sort of think before you ran to the papers and the media to tell them you were doing this, you would check with whoever your courier was, which is the United States of America, that they were happy to take the order. So I do find it quite an astonishing kind of misstep of international diplomacy, foreign policy, whatever you want to call it.
Yes. Ayesha, can you shed any light here? Because to me, to many people, it looks, and quite fairly, that the Americans don't want to incur the wrath of Vladimir Putin. They're scared of him.
Well, I think we're all scared of Vladimir Putin, and I think one of the things that is absolutely clear from, NATO leaders is that we will, provide humanitarian aid, will provide certain types of weaponry, will provide some sort of money, but we do not want any of our military weaponry or even personnel involved. I mean, there's another interesting story which broke overnight, which is some UK soldiers have said, look, we're going to go and fight. And the Ministry of Defence overnight has put out a very strong statement saying, no, absolutely not. No serving member of the British military must go over, because that could be misinterpreted by President Putin as British troops are on the ground. So I don't think it's just America, it's here in the UK as well. I mean, it just does show you that people are frightened of what Putin is capable of. And I think we have to be really, really honest about this. We all have solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and for very understandable reason, we just don't want to get at all involved on any kind of military level.
Yeah, Nick makes the point. I think there's a big difference between being scared of Putin and not wanting to provoke Putin. Ruth, on that point about these, we heard from Jerome Starkey. He's the Sun's defense editor this morning. He's in Ukraine, and he said that there are 4, of which he's spoken to 1, serving military personnel who have gone out. They've gone AWOL. They've gone out to Ukraine to fight. We've also heard this morning about the son of a Tory MP who is a former serviceman who's also gone out there. Now, you've got some involvement in this kind of side of things. What can you understand why they're doing it?
Look, I mean, I think if you look through the history of warfare, the kind of international brigades are quite a common feature. People do sign up to fight in other people's wars because they believe in what they're fighting for, whether that's for ideological, whether it's territorial, whether it's any number of reasons. But I think the Ministry of Defence is absolutely correct to say that card-carrying service members of the UK Armed Forces can't just take their kit and their badge and go to other countries and start shooting at people, because that constitutes an act of war, and you certainly can't contravene the chain of command. You know, if the United Kingdom were to be involved in any conflict, it would deploy, a brigade, it would deploy whatever it did. It would do it in that structured way and work together with its allies. What I think is interesting, though, is what we're now learning about how much involvement we've had in Ukraine in the past, not just in supplying weaponry, but in training its personnel, in training its trainers so that they can train their own soldiers, and how much support the United Kingdom has given down the years, very quietly, behind the scenes. And we appear to have been a super ally, actually, to Ukraine, with one eye on something like this happening, some form of aggressive act happening. And I think that's probably why it's so frustrating, particularly for people like Ben Wallace and the MOD, who over a number of years have done the hard yards pretty well, pretty quietly, that there's so much noise about getting things like the immigration and refugee status wrong, because actually the UK has been one of the most consistent allies that we've had in the past.
It's a great point that we need to move on of this, but just someone's made the point which Aasmah and I've been chewing over all morning, Ayesha, just on this final question about the jets. What's the difference between anti-tank missiles and a jet? What's the difference? It feels to me that we are already giving war material to Ukraine, which will lead in the loss of life of Russian soldiers. That is happening. Every time someone fires a Stinger missile in Ukraine, it's been given to them by the United Kingdom. The distinction between a jet going from Poland to the US to Ukraine versus a Stinger missile being supplied directly. The point was made to us by a Ukrainian MP was that Putin is not a rational being. If he wants to have an excuse to ratchet up tension, to ratchet up the bid towards some form of nuclear activity, he doesn't need an actual reason, because he can manufacture a reason. He manufactured a reason to go into Ukraine in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, and that is an argument that I have heard from many of the Ukrainian politicians and journalists that I've interviewed on my show. I mean, I suppose this was like a specific order. I mean, there is a whole thing about jets and the no-fly zone. But I do think people will think, look, what is the distinction? I also just, on the soldiers' point, I think one of the things that probably didn't help was about 7-8 days ago, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, saying, look, I would applaud people that went over there. I would support people that went over there to fight. And I think we're getting to the point in this conflict where the sort of tensions between what is kind of understandably sensible NATO policy, it's very hard to match that up with the kind of moral question of what we're seeing. I was at an event yesterday and the wife of the Ukrainian ambassador spoke, and just, her grief was absolutely palpable in terms of please come and help us. And really, there's so much we can do, and there is lots of stuff we're doing, but we can't give the Ukrainian politicians and people what they want, and that is a hard, sad reality.
I think that's exactly right. Let's move on to the impact of sanctions, not in Ukraine, actually back in this country. We know that the move to ban Russian oil has happened in the US and the UK. There's been all sorts of other sanctions. Global commodity prices are set to soar. We know that not just oil and gas, but also wheat, where Ukraine supplies a large bulk of the world's wheat as well. Ruth, are we in a very slow-moving train wreck here towards very, very high cost of living, where we could get inflation past 10%. They'll ramp up interest rates, even though they can't control global inflation. So you'd have people struggling with their mortgages. I don't know how doom and gloomy you feel, Ruth, about this, but it does feel that we had a cost of living crisis before the war in Ukraine. If petrol gets to £2 a litre, we're going to see colossal inflation, and we're going to see some people not managing to hold on, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides of this. So there's the global, and then there's the household. So in the global, there's going to be a price spike because people are divesting and moving into other areas and you get that lag until the taps get turned on in other production sites, whether that's in Nigeria, whether that's in the basin around Texas, whether that's in the North Sea, whether that's in the Gulf. You will find that oil producers react to a sort of a halting of demand in Russia, but it does take that time lag. So there'll be a spike, and I think that's more something that's going to be 2022 rather than something that's going to continue into 23, 24. But the problem is it's going to happen at the exact time that the price cap is being lifted on household energy bills, so not petrol prices, but how you heat your home. It's also something that's going to hit, as you say, as food prices, which have already gone up, will go up higher because Ukraine is the breadbasket for Europe. And it's going to happen at all the same time. And the government needs to think really long and hard about what levers it has and how it pulls them. Because it can't just blanket subsidize prices for people, but it does also have to look at what's in its locker. And I think this is one of the things where you sort of turn around and go, well, what should we have already done? And I think in terms of things like household heating bills, for example, I remember several years ago we were talking about doing a lot of work that was underpinned by government help and coordinated by government and had subsidies by government for people insulating their homes better, because we've got some of the oldest and draftiest housing stock in Europe, and we've also got some of the lowest temperatures consistently over the course of a year. So, why did that all just kind of die and we sort of stopped hearing anything about it? Because there were things that we could have done before now. But does that address what's going to happen now? I think it's going to be a pretty tough spring and summer, and we'll see it start to ease off in the autumn.
Before we move on to the next topic, just remind you that we are streaming this live on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. If you can't find it, go to the Times Radio account and just click on it from there. A couple of you leaving comments under that video. Dave wants to compliment you, Ayesha, on your lovely houseplants and framing. Your framing is always impeccable.
Say it's all a mirage, because if I turn the camera around, it's like a sort of jumble sale, like all around. It's just, thank you very much for that, but it's all a ruse.
You spent hours on those bookshelves. And Neil has said,
I cannot believe that I'm not being complimented on my ex-servicemen's club in Waterloo that I'm staying in tonight. My slightly bare cell that I'm in.
It's bare chic. That's all I'm going to say. Neil says, rather than make cheap political points, I just want to say what a great added aspect of the splendid Times Radio this is. Not often we blow our trumpet, so let's just do that. But Sandra has beat us to it, really. She wants to talk about refugees. It's because people feel helpless and frustrated in their ability to help the people of Ukraine. Our ability to help the refugees is pathetic. I feel ashamed of my country. Ruth, on the subject of refugees and how many we are welcoming into this country, Grant Shapps told us it was no longer 300, it's now 760. But we heard that there was, senior Tory MPs have been very critical of Priti Patel. There was a cabinet meeting yesterday where Grant Shapps apparently was questioning her quite closely about what on earth is going on. If you'd been in that cabinet meeting, what would you have wanted to ask Priti Patel about what's happening?
I think it's about, what is the hold up? Why are you sending people to, process forms in Lille when they're sitting, 26 miles, you can see them from Dover in Calais? Where are the kinks here? And why weren't we ready for this? We knew there was going to be a big movement of people. What were the processes that we should have put in? Now, this isn't something that is rusty architecture, because we had the same kinks and the same problems in July last year, when we were looking at Afghanistan and the movement of people that were coming out of there. Again, something that was policy led, and we understood what was happening. And this is, what I was saying earlier, the frustration within particularly the Conservative Party, is very strong. And you saw yesterday in the House of Commons, the immigration minister getting an absolute shellacking from his own side because of this, because in many ways, as a country and as a nation, we've done so many things right and have been ahead of the curve militarily, in terms of the consistency of our support for Ukraine. And yet you've got people like your listener there talking about how deeply ashamed they are because we haven't got this one aspect right. And I think her shame is felt by lots of people and lots of people within government as well.
Ayesha, is it ideological or is it to do with process and not enough staff?
I think it's actually ideological because having gone through the Afghanistan process, knowing that this conflict was on the horizon, some of the logistical mishaps are so basic. Anybody, if they were putting a plan together, would not have put in place some of the things that we have now. So one example, I interviewed a lady on my show on Sunday. She's out in Warsaw. There is one big processing centre in Warsaw. She was there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. There was one member of staff, one full-time member of staff behind the counter. You can imagine what the queue was like. And these people are cold, tired, hungry. Some of them have been walking for days to get to this visa processing centre to try and get their visa. Why have we not sent people over? Why has there not been, right, we need 50 people, Foreign Office, staff members out manning these? Why do we not have a visa centre in Calais? It's a no-brainer that people are going to go to Calais and then try and come over. Why have we designed a system where if you're with a family and you're a young mum with 2-3 young kids, you've got to do separate forms for your tiny, tiny children and biometrics? It does not make sense. It's like we have designed a system and we've staffed it so poorly. I think it's ideological. I think we don't want a lot of people to come over. And, this would have been a real chance for Boris Johnson in a post-Brexit world to show Remainers like me that actually Britain is going to step up to its responsibilities and be a global leader. But it feels like we've learned nothing from the kind of shambles of Afghanistan. It is really, really pitiful.
Just to find on the point, is it ideological? That's an interesting question. You're a Tory. Is there an ideology that says we don't want many people in our country, or is the system designed in normal circumstances to keep people out, and they've not managed or not had enough desire to turn that system round when they want to draw people in?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this particular case, and Ayesha, I'm expecting her to nod her head at this. When there is a question of is something in politics a cock-up or a conspiracy, you should always first reach for cock-up, always, just as a general rule. However, I think the point that she makes that over time, the complexities of immigration have gotten more complex as rules have been tightened up and that there has been campaigning from the current Conservative government to make sure that we have control over our borders, etc. That perhaps spills over when you're trying to be as fleet-footed as you are in a situation like this, where there's suddenly a word that happens that makes things change very, very quickly. Yeah. But in terms of are we only staffing it because we only want one? That sounds more like a cock-up to me than a conspiracy.
Yeah, you're just wobbling there in your cell, Ruth, in terms of the connection. But we got the point there, and I do take the cock-up versus conspiracy is a well-trodden argument indeed. Great to speak to you both as ever. Ruth Davidson, former Scottish Conservative leader. Listen to her on Friday afternoons from 1 o'clock on Times Radio, and Ayesha Hazarika, Times Radio presenter. You can listen to her on Saturdays and Sundays at drive time on Times Radio.
9:32. Let's get the news now with Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Aasmah. Good morning. The Transport Secretary says the West must be careful not to inadvertently escalate the violence in Ukraine. Grant Shapps has been speaking about Poland's offer to provide jets to Ukraine, which was rejected by the US